You're listening to the Bitcoin Takeover Podcast, the Bitcoin podcast for OGs and intermediaries. Make sure you subscribe, leave a comment, and like this episode. Also, read the new BTCT KVR magazine. This episode is sponsored by Wasabi Wallet, Crypto Steel, Shop in a Bit, and Sato Dime. Thank you for listening.
Hello there, and welcome to the Bitcoin Takeover Podcast. I am Vlad, and today we have a very special episode which concerns a use case of Bitcoin that not too many people know about. It's called open timestamps. And our guest today is Rafael Cordon, who has worked miracles for the Guatemalan elections that took place, I think, a month ago. And he was able to prevent some frauds by literally using the blockchain for votes, but not directly the blockchain, but digital signatures that prove that something existed. As far as I know, his startup, is it a startup? You can tell me later if it's a startup. It's called Simple Proof. Is that correct?
Correct.
And you are the founder or something, or CEO?
Yep.
We haven't established these details, but basically you're a local hero in Guatemala and you're able to enforce the power of democracy by leveraging Bitcoin. And this was sort of a long intro. I'm going to let you also introduce yourself and we can take it from there.
Fantastic. Thank you, Vlad. My name is Rafael Cordon. I'm a Bitcoiner since 2017. I've been involved in Bitcoin projects for the last maybe 5 years. And this new venture that we started with a couple of friends is called Simple Proof. And our mission is to uphold the integrity of digital information. We do that by leveraging the Bitcoin blockchain to do timestamping. We recently worked with the government of Guatemala to create a what we call an immutable backup. So a way to store digital images of vote tally sheets in a way that cannot be altered. So, and the purpose there is just to protect against misinformation and easily accessible, tools to alter digital documents.
Yeah, that's all very impressive. But we have to give credit to Peter Todd because he's the one who created open timestamps and basically tied it to the Bitcoin blockchain. As far as I know, every timestamp is also a transaction on the Bitcoin main chain, or can you explain more about how this works?
Sure. So Peter Todd, an OG Bitcoiner from back in the day, Peter created a protocol called open timestamps. It's an open protocol that enables anyone to basically timestamp documents on the Bitcoin blockchain. And that it uses the op return function to store a hash, but you don't have to store a single hash of a document, per transaction. Using open timestamps, it generates a Merkle tree in order to store just a root hash. And open timestamps enables you to find a specific hash of your document. We work closely with Peter. Peter is a friend of ours. He came to Guatemala during the election and helped us, and he's been advising us on tech stuff for our system. So definitely, we stand on the shoulders of giants, starting with Peter and a lot of other Bitcoin, people who have contributed to Bitcoin.
Interesting. I've had Peter about 4 times on this show, and he never mentioned anything about advising governments, basically, to organize elections in a fairer way with open timestamps. So that's fascinating. But tell me more about
There's
your individual venture and also how you ended up working with the Guatemalan government, as a lot of Bitcoiners are anarchists and they say they don't want to work with governments, but it seems like this is pretty cool and useful.
Yeah, so Peter did not advise the government. Peter was advising us. We brought him in as a consultant. He basically consulted on helping us use open timestamps in the best way. This was recently in June. And so, yeah, what was the question, Vlad? Sorry.
So you can tell me more about your venture and how you contributed to the elections.
Yeah, so we were able to show to the government what the value would be of basically generating an immutable record of elections information. You mentioned crypto anarchists and why work with the government. I mean, I don't know if I'm a crypto anarchist or not. I believe in democracy, and democracy has to be implemented in a way that people can vote, right? And who's going to implement it? Right now, it's governments. So governments run elections. And so if you want to, push for transparency and, data integrity and democracy, you need to work with the people who run the democracies right now, who operate, the systems and the processes to enable, democratic voting.
Yeah, and there always, even in the West, in the most established democracies, there's always this question of how were the votes counted? That was a big issue in the United States in the two past presidential rounds of elections. There was always the suspicion that there might have been some fraud involved. And I think it's certainly useful to have some sort of, not necessarily an oracle of truth, but a way to verify that something actually happened. So, how does open timestamps work to verify that the voting happened or count the votes, or what is it used for more specifically?
So our solution, including and open timestamps, which is an open source protocol. If you see it, it is a protocol just like any other, like the Bitcoin protocol. We don't count the votes. Votes are not counted. We only timestamp the information. So the Guatemalan elections process is all paper-based. People, mark a piece of paper. They put it in a bag in a voting table, and in that voting table, it's closed at some point in the day, and volunteer citizens take the votes out and count them and create a vote tally sheet. That tally sheet is then scanned and sent to what's called a preliminary result transmission system. They call it TREP in Spanish. And so this system is an application that shows the screen, shows the documents, the scanned images on the screen, and there are data entry people who manually enter the information. And this data entry process is the results of the data entry process are shown in a web portal for anyone to see, the election results as they come in, right? On election day, everybody's excited. They're looking at the TV, they're looking at their computer, seeing the vote counting come in. And so Simple Proof integrates with this system to show that the actual tally sheet that was used for the data entry is actually timestamped on the Bitcoin blockchain. And so that document, you can certify that document existed at least from a certain point in time. And the risk there is, as you say, there's a lot of people say, oh, the vote counting was wrong. It's not just the United States. It's happening all over the world. It happened in Brazil. It's becoming a global trend. And, I'm all for, accountability in government and not just trusting whatever the government says. But we need a way to figure out what the truth is. So what Simple Proof does is it shows the image that was stored in the immutable backup, and it shows the open timestamps proof, so you can verify it for yourself. Any individual citizen can go on this portal and check if a document is really stamped on the on Bitcoin. They don't have to trust me. They don't have to trust my company. They don't have to trust the government. They can just verify for themselves. Now, how those numbers were counted, like the data sheet entry process, that is something that we cannot do. But the system, the application shows what the data entry was, and you can verify with the image. Okay, does this coincide with what the data entry people, with the numbers that they put in? This whole process is described in a documentary that we did. If you go to film.simpleproof.com, you can see a documentary that explains the process and explain how Simple Proof worked.
Wasabi Wallet is unfairly private. It's the most advanced and most used Bitcoin privacy wallet with 500,000 downloads across Windows, Mac OS, and Linux, as well as thousands of fresh new Bitcoins getting mixed every month. Wasabi makes use of the new generation Wabi Sabi engine to create mega coin joins, thus mixing your Bitcoins with those of hundreds of other users. For amounts lower than 0.01 BTC and remixes, you pay no coordination fee. Even if you don't use CoinJoins, Wasabi Wallet has a native Tor integration and downloads block filters to help you keep your network level and public key privacy. Download Wasabi Wallet for free today at wasabiwallet.io and experience the future of Bitcoin privacy.
Yes, I think something very important happened here, because in the first part of the interview, it sounded as if you did voting on the Bitcoin blockchain. But in reality, it was just timestamping some preliminary results recorded by the electoral offices that were doing reporting. And that data ended up becoming a proof that the information was sent to be centralized and counted. And it wasn't counting every vote. It wasn't voting directly on it, but it was only verifying that the documents that are preliminary to the result were sent and were validated. And I know this is also part of your documentary, but maybe I read about it, but I haven't seen it yet. I will after this interview. So basically, I know that you prevented fraud, which means that there were some attempts to change the outcome of the result. Can you tell me more about that?
So Bitcoin is a digital system, right? And the people who apply the laws are people, right? Bitcoin can't, apply laws or anything. One thing that happened was that one of the political parties that lost the presidential election, they showed an altered image of the Simple Proof verification page with a different time, and their argument was, these tally sheets were received before the voting had closed. So they were that was their argument. But on social media, a lot of people came out and they actually went to the Simple Proof verification page. They checked, and of course, it came in. That document came in on time when it said it had come in. So that was a sort of an attempt to say that there had been some tampering with that information that was proved wrong using Bitcoin. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, the argument of the losing party was that there was a wave of votes that came after the elections had closed.
Before. So like somebody had already started sending voting information.
So before the election started, is that what you're saying?
Before the polling stations were closed, they said, somebody started feeding information to the system. But when you check the timestamp, the timestamp proves that it was after the polling booths were closed.
Oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that's one of the oldest tricks in the book. When it comes to politics, you're going to say, yeah, it's rigged. Of course, we won. And if we invalidate the results, we're pretty sure that we're going to win or something. So in this regard, I think
does not protect.
I think you saved millions of dollars in, election expenses, because if there was not any instance to show the truth, there are some legal proceedings and strings that you can pull to reorganize elections to make a new round. And that can drastically change the outcome because it relies on people participating. And when one party loses, they're going to be more aggressive in rallying their supporters, and that can change the outcome and the fate of a country. But you are able to timestamp and prove that all the results were sent at the correct time. And that's pretty cool.
Yes, and election, simple proof is not a solution only for elections. Of course, you can timestamp anything, right? Timestamping has been around for a long time, not cryptographic, blockchain-based timestamping, but when somebody marks their card, back in the day when a factory worker would, put their card in the clock, you're timestamping at what time you come in, you put the card in again, you timestamp the time that you go out. So timestamping has been around for a long time, but this type of secure, unalterable timestamping or safe timestamping is something new, and I think it can be used not just for elections. I think elections is a very important type of information that people need certainty and transparency on, but I think this can be used in other areas of public documents, for example, intellectual property, the justice system, Freedom of Information Act requests, digital evidence, all sorts of areas where it's important to know when a piece of digital information was created. We just happen to use it for elections now, but that doesn't have to be, the only use.
Yeah, it can also be used for historical purposes, for archiving. I remember I was using open timestamps on tweets. There used to be this stamp bot on Twitter, and you could use, I think it was tweet stamp or something, and you could tag that bot and say stamp this, and you would receive a very nice reply with a landing page where you could go. And at the peak of the project, you could also see the Bitcoin price at the time. So this was basically made for challenging naysayers who are saying Bitcoin is going to zero or something. You could timestamp and then go back a year later and prove, this hasn't gone to zero. Unfortunately, Elon Musk removed some of these functionalities or put them under payroll, and the people running these services, they don't make any profit, so there was no incentive for them to rerun the tweet stamp bot. But I think it was one of the coolest features on Twitter.
Yeah, you can timestamp any kind of digital information. And the way Peter designed the protocol, you can timestamp any amount of digital information because it all comes down to a hash. And so that's what's incredible about that protocol. You can, timestamp anything, any piece of digital information. And it's very exciting. I think, and it's incredible that Peter's first version came out in 2016. And people haven't used it that much. This is the first time that it's being used in an official manner, by an institution like the government of Guatemala. But I think we'll start seeing a lot of this and a lot of these types of uses, as time progresses. Just looking at how easy it is now to generate fake information using AI systems. If you think about it, in 10 years, I don't think we'll be able to tell the difference between an AI-generated image or an AI-generated text and a human-generated text. Right now, it's hard. In 10 years, it's going to be impossible. So how can we make sure that we are looking at the truth? I think searching for what is the truth is going to be one of the bigger challenges for people.
Yeah, but at the same time, you're presenting timestamping as a solution for this, but there is no way to prevent AI from performing the timestamping. So for now, it's only humans who can do the timestamps, but who knows what's going to happen in the 10-year time frame that you introduced.
It's not just timestamping. So yeah, we use timestamps. It's timestamping initially. I think timestamping with a combination of PGP and digital signatures will be the way to enable for a person to certify what the truth is. Yeah, it's not just timestamps. It has to be digital signatures.
Yeah, and for now, it's only humans who can use this type of technology. We're not sure about AI yet. So far, I think the best use cases and the most successful implementations are the ones that basically make me lose my job. As you can generate text and you can have a robot voice, read all of that, and it can fake even the timbre of voices of famous people. So I
Yeah.
guess in my case, it's also super simple. So someone could actually create an AI bot to replace me, but I'm not sure if it would
Yes.
ask the same stupid questions as I do. So I'm not as easily replaceable. So tell me more about simple proof and what's next on. I was about to say roadmap, but you're just a project. You don't have necessarily a roadmap. But what's next for simple proof?
Well, we do have a roadmap. The next step is incorporating PGP and digital signatures. We need to do some research on that and see how we can incorporate that, or some other way of a person being able to say, I am such person, and this is and this is my timestamp. That's the next step. And we want to start engaging with governments and institutions that want to bring more transparency to public information. Maybe that's not the case in every government in the world, but we want to work with people who genuinely want to do good and provide more transparency for public information. Yeah.
Yeah, that's useful. And I was going to ask if, after the success that you had in the Guatemalan elections, were you contacted by more governments to do pretty much the same job?
We are in conversations with several institutions that are interested in this solution. I think it wasn't just the technology itself, but the validation that the whole Bitcoin community, and not just Bitcoin community, but regular people who know something about Bitcoin, the validation that they gave to this, it makes it more powerful, because it's not just a technical thing that solves a problem, but it's also the fact that people trust Bitcoin and understand like the Bitcoin primitives of how it works. When I say trust Bitcoin, I mean, you can't reverse transactions, all these types of things on Bitcoin, like that we understand and we believe. That has helped this become more word of mouth. Like more people understand how it works, and that gives validity to the solution. So I was approaching it just from like the technical side on how it works technically and whatever. But after the project was successfully implemented, we realized that there's a whole social part around it that helps strengthen the story, because politicians, they can generate narratives regardless if it's true or not, right? There's this thing about, if you say something 3 times, then people start believing it. And around this, there also has to be a narrative, right? Of giving validity to Bitcoin. And I think all of us in the Bitcoin community, we help it move forward, not just from a technical standpoint, but of telling the Bitcoin story. And this Bitcoin story, I think, is useful, and also in government, right? Because governments are always like, oh, I don't want to touch Bitcoin. I'm like, this is a only criminals use it or whatever. But when they approach Bitcoin from this point of view as a unalterable source of truth or of information, it makes them more. It helps open more doors in that world. Just like cloud technologies, all of the governments, when cloud came out, they were like, I don't want to. Where's my data? Where's it located? Where's the data center? But later on, you ask them, where's your email? Oh, I use Google, or I use Microsoft Outlook on the cloud. So your data is already on the cloud. Maybe your applications are not on the cloud, but if your email is on the cloud, there's a lot of important information in email. And I think this is a way to also sort of bring more adoption of Bitcoin in the public sector. If people start using Bitcoin in a manner just to safeguard digital information, it can open that conversation of Bitcoin, the money, right?
CryptoSteel is the original Bitcoin cold storage backup, and it's been innovating self-custody since 2013. Designed and manufactured in Europe from the finest and most resistant stainless steel, the CryptoSteel cassette and the CryptoSteel capsule are industry standards. These cold storage devices are made to resist house fires, extreme floods, and physical shocks. You can also use CryptoSteel to store your important passwords, BIP39 passphrase, or Nostr private keys. Buy your CryptoSteel today from cryptosteel.com and use promo code BTCTKVR to get a 10% discount. CryptoSteel. Secure your Bitcoin like an OG.
Yeah, I think what you said basically covered 2 or 3 of my subsequent questions. But I'm going to tell you this. I remember 3 years ago or longer, when I first came across the concept of NFTs on Twitter, I was like, what's the point of this? And they told me, oh, but it can prove that this was created by the original artist, This token that is the NFT goes back to this, and it's all about provenance. And I was like, why don't you use open timestamps for that? And nobody actually had a proper reply other than, speculation. And it's interesting because open timestamps can also be used to prove that something was created at a certain point in time by an artist.
Yes. Yeah, the NFTs have the additional property of transferring ownership. Here, when we're talking about public information, like elections information, the owner is the people, right? You shouldn't have somebody who claims to be an owner, right? I can see maybe a use case for NFTs in some sort of digital asset thing, but what we're trying to do is, uphold the integrity of information, not see who sells it to whom and who's the new owner. That's like, maybe I think in my mind, maybe not the most important, the thing that I want to devote my time to right now, but we'll see.
Yeah, I think the argument was basically that it's easy to counterfeit art, and their system of tracking ownership and stuff like that could theoretically help with this. But what's also very important is to prove that an artist created this painting at this point in time, because there are lots of fakes out there. And this can be used maybe today, maybe in the future, for the simple purpose of keeping track of how many of them exist. Not necessarily to track them during every sale, but knowing how many were created by the future Van Gogh or Picasso or whatever.
Yeah, I think my greatest concern is public information right now. That's where I'm focused on. There's a lot of public information that we have to trust, or we are coerced into trusting, that would benefit from this, starting with elections. But for example, intellectual property rights, like,
patents and stuff.
Yeah, copyrights, patents, trademarks, court rulings. A court ruling, you can see some fake court ruling, or the whole jurisprudence, having that be timestamped, and that a certain court created a certain document about a court ruling, I think is very, very important. Freedom of Information Act requests. So when a citizen wants information from a government agency, you have the legal right to request, at least in the US, you have the legal right to request that information. And so that should be timestamped when you receive it, right? Another thing is, for example, digital evidence. So if I am accusing someone, or somebody accuses me, and they they provide digital evidence of a crime or something like that, that should be timestamped, just to make sure that that was the information that was received in the moment when the digital evidence was provided, right? So there's a lot of use cases there. of information that we need to trust, right?
I have this technical question about open timestamps. I know that they are tied to the issuance of new Bitcoin blocks. So whenever a new block gets mined, you can trace back that signature to that specific Bitcoin block when it was created, right? But is it relative to Bitcoin blocks, or is it more accurate as in by the minute? Like, is the Bitcoin
No.
block issuance system the time system that powers open timestamps?
Yes, the time for a timestamp is the block time, right?
Yeah, that's what I wanted to
Bitcoin
know.
time or Bitcoin sequences have to be in blocks. Yeah, that's as fine grained as you can get. Yeah.
Yeah, because I had this question for Peter when I had him on the show about 2 years ago, and basically asked him, how does Bitcoin know what time it is? Because it's not written at the protocol level. It's actually the miners who broadcast
Mm-hmm.
new blocks, and they have a time signature, and they say this happened at this time. And it's the rest of the network that verifies if the time is correct. So the miners can actually game this if they want, but they need like a huge majority for this to happen, which hasn't happened because there wasn't any sort of majority, like super majority of 51% that tried to game the system. But it's certainly interesting that, it adds up to the whole time chain idea.
Yeah, I've heard that word going around. I call it blockchain. I mean, at the end of the day, whatever.
Yeah,
But
it's
yeah,
not a clock.
it's
It
a time
doesn't tell
machine.
time, but apparently
It tells order. It
yeah,
tells order. Yeah.
it can be used to date timestamps, which I think is pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, for example, you could integrate open timestamps into your emails, right? And have, so that's another idea that we've been bouncing around, like integrating to an email server. So when anybody sends an email, then it gets timestamped on open timestamps. Integrating with something like DocuSign and Adobe Sign, these signing tools, they already provide an interface for a timestamping server. Why not use the most secure, resilient timestamps ever created, right? Photocopy machines, like you click on a button to send, you do a photocopy and you click on a button to send an email. Why isn't that document timestamped when it's photocopied? So there's an infinity of applications for this.
Here's a very Bitcoiny question to this. How does open timestamp scale? Because you have this hash which gets added into Bitcoin blocks, but obviously the information itself does not get included into the blocks. So where does that information go?
So open timestamps can scale, I would say, infinitely, because at the end of the day, if you have enough computing power, you can scale it as much as you want, because at the end of the day, it generates a Merkle tree. And so the root hash is really what goes into the Bitcoin transaction. So if you have enough computing power to generate all the hashes and generate the tree, the Merkle tree, you just store the root hash, and so you could store any amount of information on a single hash. I think so. I think it can scale in. There's some detail, and this is something that I think Peter would be the best person to answer. He's mentioned some things around the server architecture, how to make it distribute the hash generation, but that's more like an internal architecture thing on the protocol implementation. Yeah.
It's certainly super interesting technology, which wasn't really used to its full potential. And I'm very happy that you have this startup Simple Proof, which does exactly this task. And do you think that the Guatemalan government is now more friendly with Bitcoin, specifically because of this instance when basically the government in place was able to legitimize the elections thanks to this timestamping system that's based on Bitcoin?
I think this was the first an initial implementation that shows that this technology works. And so it's opened more people in the public sector to look at it and say, because I've heard a lot of people in public sector talking about how can we use blockchain in elections and blockchain this in elections. It's always something that's been sort of, being discussed, but this was the first that I know of, the first implementation where it actually together and worked. And so people in government are starting to look at this, and people that I've talked to in government are starting to look at this and see, wow, this really worked. This can be used in my agency or in my institution for timestamping this particular type of document. So it's just stimulating creativity.
Yeah, you were introduced to me about a month ago by Carlino, and I must thank him for this in the interview because he was very nice and generous to make this happen. And I think it was only 2 or 3 days after this that Bitcoin Magazine published an article to detail exactly what happened and how you helped the elections in Guatemala. And on one hand, I was a bit pissed. I was like, oh no, because I was traveling at the time and I couldn't record the interview immediately. But what was the response after that article happened? Because I guess a lot of people got exposed to this use case.
The response has been great from the Bitcoin community. This is the first time that I'm like super involved in the Bitcoin community. It's incredible how much Bitcoiners are interested in this, which I say it's a boring thing, right? Timestamps are this boring thing that people are not thinking about, like when they think about money and the other things that Bitcoin is used for. But I think it proved that Bitcoin can be used in an official manner by government, and that is sort of a milestone that gets people very excited. And it's sort of helping change the narrative inside government about using Bitcoin. And so it's been a great response. And Carlino is an amazing person. He's a very special. He's very special.
Yeah, so for context, Carlino is very much involved with Mi Primer Bitcoin project. And he started, as far as I know, in El Salvador, but tried to extend it. When I met him at Balticani Badger last year in 2022, he was presenting to me this idea that you have these Central American states that were part of the same state not too long ago. And I think he has these unification ideas which somehow come together under the Bitcoin umbrella. And he's trying to spread Bitcoin adoption around Guatemala and El Salvador, and I guess a few other countries, specifically because he believes that he's going to bring these countries together by having the same currency. At least that's the impression that I get. And it's super ambitious.
He has a lot of very ambitious ideas. And I think, so Central America used to be just one single region. And if you look at all the countries, they're very similar. For example, the election system is very similar across all of the countries in Central America. It was pioneered in Guatemala. So Guatemala is a recent democracy. The constitution is from 1983. Before that, Guatemala had 30 years of military dictatorships. And so in 1983, or around that year, the elections process was designed in a sort of decentralized manner where volunteer citizens are the ones who actually count the votes and run the whole election. And so that was replicated by all the other countries, or at least most of the other countries in Central America. So Central America is from Guatemala, which is south of Mexico, down to Panama, which is north of Colombia. That little part of the American continent is Guatemala, Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Honduras, El Salvador, Panama, Belize, that little region.
Remember the paper wallet? yes, the good old days when you printed your Bitcoin private key on an offline computer. It was so fun, but not really easy and totally not secure. Today, we have Dime, a chip card that acts just like your good old paper wallet, but with all the modern security features and top-notch functionality. It turns your Bitcoin into a bearer asset, which you can easily trade in person. Thanks to NFC, you can use the Dime card with your smartphone. Creating a new pair of Bitcoin keys takes just 2 swipes. Check your balance in real time, create multiple key pairs. Whenever you want, you can reveal your Bitcoin wallet's private key with just a single click. The simple, uncluttered interface lets you quickly see if a key pair has been unsealed. Finally, the cold storage you've been looking for. Available now on dime.io.
Yeah, and there's a lot of Bitcoin stuff happening in the region. And I'm very proud to say this. I almost made it to adopting Bitcoin last year in El Salvador. I couldn't travel, so I bought my plane ticket. I paid for my hotel. I was ready to go, but then I got sick. I couldn't travel, and I still regret it to this day that I couldn't make it. But there's revolution in the air there. Maybe that it's also the nice weather. Maybe it's also the fact that there's a long history of changes. I think you guys have you have a culture that favors political change and you embrace something new when it comes along. But the issue is that when something else comes along, the old one tends to get thrown away. So it's going to be interesting for me to observe how Bitcoin either has staying power and is going to become a long-term element in the region, or else it's going to be only an experiment for these places. I don't know.
I think in El Salvador, Bitcoin is going to be, I don't think they're going to take it away. I think it's brought a lot of business just from Bitcoiners, tourism. It's generating, I think, good returns. I don't know the numbers, right? But I think it's put El Salvador on the map in a way that other countries would now like to be. And so I think it's an innovation, and I'm glad it happened because San Salvador, the capital of El Salvador, is literally a 4-hour drive from Guatemala City, so super close. And hopefully it's just the beginning. I'm very excited about El Salvador.
Rafael, I haven't asked you directly if you are from Guatemala. I'm going to assume that you are either born there or currently live there, because you don't have a very strong accent in English. You could easily pass as someone who is bilingual or something. But I wanted to ask you, what is the local Bitcoin scene like? Do you have meetups? Do you have conferences? Do you have something going?
Yep. Yes, so I started getting involved in Bitcoin in Guatemala with a local Bitcoin community back in 2017. There is a lot of cool stuff going on around Bitcoin in Guatemala. Not so much adoption from the government level, but for example, there are startups that are sort of addressing the remittance use case with Bitcoin. There's a startup called Osmo, which is doing very well. Also, there is an experiment, sort of like Bitcoin Beach in El Salvador, that's called Bitcoin Lake over in Lake Atitlán in Guatemala. It's this lake that's it's a beautiful place surrounded by mountains. And so they're trying to build this circular economy similar to Bitcoin Beach. So there is sort of the grassroots side on the community, and also, top-down things where government is starting to look at Bitcoin. But it's nowhere near as advanced as El Salvador, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's fine. Personally, I believe that grassroots adoption with people who choose to adopt it as opposed to a government imposing it from above is the preferable solution. As something that the government brings to the table can easily take a U-turn and become something hated by the people. Specifically, not because it's a bad idea, but because it comes from the government. But if the people embrace it and it's their choice, and every day they choose to get paid and make payments and transact and save in that currency, I think that's what true freedom is all about. And I have great respect for countries that don't necessarily regulate, but just ignore and let it blossom. Just take a back seat, and they're like, okay, let's see where this goes. Let's see what the people choose. Basically, a free market for
Yes,
currencies. I think that's the real Austrian economics perspective on the situation.
totally agree.
I mean, I don't want to be mean to the whole situation in El Salvador, but I wasn't a fan specifically because it was introduced like this. Of course, it's useful in the history of Bitcoin and in the development of Bitcoin to have a nation state that declares it its official currency. But there is already an opposition party that builds its campaign story around this whole Bitcoin situation, saying that they were better off and blah blah, and all of these foreigners coming into the country and ruining the culture and destroying the local economy by increasing prices, gentrification, all of these Marxist terms. Of course, this is all because the government did it. It's, if it was the private sector and it was only a successful mining startup, as we have seen lots of situations where Bitcoin miners come into a village or something and they increase the living standard all over the board, they create jobs, they make everything
Mhm.
nicer, and that's a very cool situation that people don't hate. But if it comes from the government, they're more likely to hate it, only because they don't like the face of a guy, or they prefer another party, and then they're going to embrace the entire ideology of the other side only because it's political.
I think I agree with you. I think in some cases people look towards the government for guidance on, for example, taxes. If this company, a large corporation, I don't mean like a corner store, but a large corporation starts working with Bitcoin, how do we report it for tax purposes? And so it's more like the bureaucracy within, not in government, but in the company that says, wait a minute, we don't want to work with Bitcoin until the government gives us clarity on how we do accounting for tax purposes. Or is it an asset? Or is it a currency? Or is it, right? And so I think that kind of blocks adoption in larger corporations or larger companies, because they don't want to break the law, right? And they don't. And in our country, it's more like whatever. You need to sort of, there's not a lot of leeway with how you interpret a law. So if there's no law for it, then people don't want to touch it, because it's not like they think, oh, it's for criminals or whatever. It's just they are concerned about the consequences that this may have in the future if the government comes out with some law that says, Bitcoin is classified as an asset or as whatever, and then, we owe back taxes, right? And so that sort of clarity in terms of regulations, or in terms of giving Bitcoin a legal interpretation or a legal character, I think is useful as well if you want adoption by large corporations. That's just my point of view.
Yeah, I think you nailed it in the sense that you mentioned large corporations that need this, because honestly, startups don't have to worry too much in this regard. And if there is no law to regulate it, it's not a crime, because there is no framework. There is nothing to forbid you from using something. You're using it because specifically there is nothing to stop you from using it in the way that you desire. And I think that startups have more room to make maneuvers. How should I put it?
More appetite for risk.
Yeah, that too. Whereas corporations, they always have these large legal departments. They have more, how should I put it, more votes at the table. That's something. So it's more difficult for them to embrace a new payments technology that's superior when they are so ingrained into the status quo. And most likely they also have their own stake in local or national politics, and they have their own interests, and maybe they lobby, maybe they do stuff. So it's more complicated.
I would challenge anyone to find a pro Bitcoin compliance department in any company that is not like an exchange or a Bitcoin company. Any compliance department in a company that doesn't deal with cryptocurrencies is like anti-Bitcoin, right? You're not gonna see them. Oh yeah, compliance department, they want Bitcoin. They're like, we want to be helpful for Bitcoin adoption. Never, right? They want to make sure that everything that they do is approved by the government and regulations and all those things. So I think what El Salvador did gives sort of regulatory clarity to large corporations. And you saw that, for example, the company that owns the Starbucks franchise in El Salvador taking Bitcoin payments, right? You can pay with Bitcoin in Starbucks there because there is legal clarity from the government. Whereas in other places, it's not going to go through the compliance department. Like they're not gonna accept it, right?
It's also useful and very powerful to set a precedent and show the rest of the world, this is how we have done it, and this is the way in which you can do it. And I think this is a good way for me to return back to simple proof, because you have showed the world how you can use this open timestamps technology to make sure that the election data, at least the election reporting, is timestamped in a way that cannot be forged. And there's a lot of power that comes from this. I think, I don't want to say big words, but this can be useful for people who are skeptical in regards to their democracies. Of course, the individual vote count is subjective, and there are humans who count every paper ballot, or in an electronic system, you're always going to have doubts and say, oh, the software was right or whatever. But the reporting overall, and that's where you are concerned, is transparent, and you can see when it was sent and from which polling station and how many of them sent them until this exact time. So there's a lot more transparency in regards to how the total amount of votes ended up being counted. So you're helping a lot of people regain faith in democracy.
I wouldn't go that far, but we're helping provide certainty and transparency for public documents.
I have a lot of friends on Twitter who are against democracy of any kind, and they say, oh, it's so degenerate. It's always a choice between the lesser evil, and you never get to choose who you want. You only have a limited set of options. Voting doesn't matter, doesn't make any change. But at the same time, they're like, oh, Donald Trump was actually an interesting choice because he shook the foundations of the country. And I'm like, okay, so voting doesn't count, but you voted this guy and a lot has changed. Like, make it make sense.
Yeah. And regardless if it's Trump or who is the candidate, we need to provide transparency. And I think Donald Trump set a precedent for the whole world on how to deny the results of an election. And we're seeing it. It's this trend, and I've seen it in a lot of countries. Come out, the loser says that there's fraud, and that's the big thing. And now every loser says that they're fraud. Whether there's fraud, I don't know. There's no way I can say or not, but it's definitely what's happening in the world. Like people are and that just undermines institutions, right? Undermines the government. Undermines people's trust in the government, and people have to distrust the government. I think you can't trust anything from the government, but you need to. If you don't trust democracy, then it's I don't know. I think it's an open-ended question. But if you don't trust democracy, then what's the other? What's the other option, right?
Yeah, I know. It's a huge rabbit hole. I'm a graduate in political science. I spent 5 years of my time looking into this stuff and having these debates. There is no perfect or ideal regime. Guys like Saifuddin say no, but a king has skin in the game because the king's son is going to be the one that rules. So they have an extended point of view and they make decisions thinking on the long term. But good luck with that. Look at history. You have lots of king beheadings and lots of dynasties that try to replace the existing ones. It's
Yes.
not as simple as that.
Mhm.
At least with democracy, you have a way to remove without violence the people who are in power. I think that's the
Yes.
biggest feature of democracy. It's not that you can vote any idiot into office, it's that you can remove that idiot out of office.
Yes, that's a really good insight. Definitely, that's the way to. It's not about putting people; it's about removing, being able to remove people. Yeah, yeah, I agree. And what we're doing is just providing more guardrails on the process to make it more transparent, right? But yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, you mentioned that it's a boring project, but the scope of this project is very powerful. It can have lots of ramifications across. I made a big statement with regaining faith in democracy, but it's true. It does need to gain more legitimacy and provide the people the reassurance that their vote actually matters and it's being counted as such. And of course, it's not
Yes.
entirely, as this has been, I think, for 10 years or longer, a meme about voting on the blockchain, which never happened. It doesn't really scale. It doesn't make too much sense. I think paper voting is best. And I did my bachelor, what do you call it, dissertation or thesis,
Mhm.
whichever of these. I did my bachelor thesis on the topic of online elections. And the conclusion that I have drawn from my research, obviously, you have examples in Estonia and you have examples even in Romania with the military, which is allowed to vote online when they're deployed in Afghanistan or something. And there have been cases of that. But the main issue with voting electronically in any way, by not showing up to a polling booth where you can vote, is that you can prove that the person voting is in fact the voter himself or herself. And you can also have situations where someone sets up a computer in a building and then you have people waiting in line to get paid to vote at that computer and someone else watches how they vote. I mean, that's something that can happen. And it's a
Mhm.
way to rig the elections or make them not less legitimate, but less fair. Because a feature of voting is supposed to be that voting is secret and that voting is direct, meaning that the person who has the right to vote is the one that goes to vote. And that's something that you cannot prove with any kind of electronic system that's remote.
No,
And I think so
paper
far,
is the best way.
paper, as stupid as it sounds, as destructive as it is for trees and as costly it is to count, and as subjective it is, because sometimes you have people marking with an X and sometimes people circle or they make or all sorts of sign, and you can have other people who watch the ballot and they're like, I'm going to invalidate this because it looks suspicious to me, because the X is maybe slightly to the left or slightly to the right, or some people circle the name of the candidate or something. They don't make the right marking on the ballot, even though they clearly indicate their
Mhm.
preference. This is an issue, but I think it's worth it on the long run because you can verify. It takes a long time, but you can verify the paper.
And anyone can verify, right? Any
Mhm.
person.
Exactly. You don't need to be a cryptographer. You don't need to have any special sets of skills. You just need to gain access to the paper and not destroy it or forge it or make any
Mhm.
modifications to it afterwards. But yeah, paper works. As far as I spent a year of my life
Not for
try
money.
Not for money, not paper money, of course. But for voting, I spent a year of life writing this thesis back in 2014 when I was completing my studies. And it was kind of dumb to come to this conclusion. Okay, I was such a big fan of online voting. I was thinking, it's going to, if everyone can vote from their phone, it's going to turn our democracy into a direct democracy. So we don't need representatives anymore. I was super utopian about this. And then I realized why it's such a bad idea. And I was like, oh, no, it's this boomer story. You start out as this young person who's very enthusiastic and wants to change the world. And then you realize that the world doesn't have to change. And that's pretty deep because the problem that you see already has the most reasonable trade-off, as opposed to something which you introduce that comes with different problems. That's the conservative argument. But yeah. Open timestamps, really cool technology.
Incredible technology, an incredible idea. Yeah.
That's still underutilized. There are so many use cases that people can do. If people want to get consultancy from your firm, which once again is called Simple Proof, if you're listening on Spotify, maybe you forgot about this, but on YouTube, I think you're going to have like a reminder in the title all the time. But I think that's also on Spotify. Anyway, how can people contact you to get consultancy or something?
So our website is simpleproof.com. You can visit our website, send an email, hello@simpleproof.com. I'm happy to discuss this subject. I would ask people to please watch the documentary. It's 15 minutes long, but it's very well made. You can see it at film.simpleproof.com. and tells this whole story in detail.
Yeah, we'll watch that, because what else can a Bitcoiner do? As we support each other, and we also learn about new stuff, because I got to the point where people ask me, don't you get bored of only covering Bitcoin? But there's so much happening. And sometimes I feel like I'm missing out. I'm looking at project. I'm looking right now at Liana Wallet, for example, which allows you to lock your coins for multiple years. I'm like, I'm missing out on that one because I'm focusing on something else. But I gotta try that too. And now open timestamps. I mean, it sounds so boring on the surface, but it has such powerful consequences if you use it correctly.
I think boring things just become part of life, like HTTP, right? HTTP, so boring, and it's part of everyone's life, and everybody, I would say like 90% of the world uses it every day, right?
Rafael, are you also personally on social networks, or how can people reach out to you?
Yeah, on Twitter, I'm Rafa_Cordon. So you can reach out, anyone can reach out there.
Okay, and that's it. Are you also on Nostr or other platforms?
I am, but I'm not sure how to share my my username on Nostr.
You can email it to me. I'll put it in the description.
Okay, cool.
So right now, I'm not sure if I have any more questions. Actually, I have a suggestion for the listeners to check out the documentary. You said it's film.simpleproof.com.
Simpleproof.com.
Okay.
Yeah.
Check that out. And thank you for your time, Rafa. This has been planned for about 2 or 3 weeks to record. And I'm happy that we finally did it.
Yes, I'm very happy. Thank you for the opportunity to share what we've done, Vlad. Really appreciate it.
Shop and Bit is the online store where you can buy anything with your Bitcoin. Choose between more than 800,000 products, book flights and hotels, and order everything else through the concierge service. With Shop and Bit, you can buy your weekly groceries, get the latest iPhone, upgrade your computer, buy something sexy for your new girlfriend, book a trip to El Salvador through the travel hacking service, and also grab a copy of the latest Bitcoin Takeover magazine to read in the airplane. Everything is integrated with a familiar shopping experience experience that doesn't track you and deletes your data after the order gets completed. You also get a 3% discount if you pay in Bitcoin. Try Shop and Bit today and use promo code BTCTKVR for a €5 discount on your first order. Make sure you subscribe, leave a comment, and like this episode. Thank you for listening.